How is it going, everyone? Got quite a lot to talk about in this video. A all-time classic, and I don't think that's hyperbole to say that about Far Cry 3, is getting a nice upgrade on PlayStation 5. And look, we crap on Ubisoft all the time, but I gotta give them credit when it comes to upgrading their existing titles on PS5. While a lot of PlayStation 4 titles and existing titles are stuck at 30 frames per second on PlayStation 5, Ubisoft has been going back through their vault catalog of titles and updating them to be 60 frames per second. Maybe it's a small thing. To me, that's a big deal, so we'll talk all about that. And as I was recording this video, Ubisoft has officially announced that Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon will also be getting the 60 FPS patch come January the 21st. And on top of that, speaking of classic titles, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered has some really interesting stats attached to it that I do want to highlight. We'll get to that at the end of this video. But as noted, Far Cry 3 Classic Edition will be getting a 60 frames per second upgrade on January the 21st. And I thought Far Cry 3, first of all, given that it was a PlayStation 3 title, it being 30 frames per second on PlayStation 4 to begin with is kind of egregious. But the same thing can be said with Assassin's Creed 2, the Ezio Collection. Those games are also 30 frames per second on PlayStation 4. Hopefully, they'll go back to those games and make them 60 frames per second as well. And again, I've been loving that Ubisoft has been doing this. Is this something everybody's gonna take advantage of and go back and play some older games? No, but guess what? This is little things you can do. These are little things you can do to build some goodwill, which God knows Ubisoft needs at this stage of the game. And I'm not saying that updating classic games to be 60 frames per second, where you can make the argument they should have been 60 frames per second from the get-go, is gonna do everything to rebuild the goodwill that Ubisoft has absolutely nuked over the past decade or so. But you know what? It's a little thing that I'm gonna appreciate, and I can give credit to Ubisoft where it's due. I would love to see Assassin's Creed Unity get updated to 60 frames per second. I know a lot of people, myself included, want to do another playthrough of that game at some point because it was a technical disaster back in 2014 when it came out. I played the game on PC and it was just a nightmare, but nonetheless, it has been fixed up. But I think the one thing to get people really excited about that game in particular and going back to it is making it 60 frames per second. Also, go back and do the Ezio Collection, make that 60 frames per second as well. That's one of the ones that's more egregious because AC2, Brotherhood, and Revelations are PlayStation 3 games. Probably should have been 60 frames per second right out the gate on PlayStation 4. And don't quote me if I'm wrong, I believe those games are 60 FPS on Xbox as well, that being AC2, Brotherhood, and Revelations. But nonetheless, at the very least, they're getting to these games. Syndicate is 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5 as well, and Syndicate was broken on PlayStation 5 for a little bit, but good to see that as well. And they've already done it with some of the newer titles in AC Origins, Odyssey. Those games are 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5, and Far Cry 3 is, again, a fantastic game, but sometimes I'm just like, dude, I know this Far Cry 3 Classic Edition on the PlayStation Store, very much a classic edition because it really does play like it did on the PlayStation 3, and it sometimes is a little bit difficult for me to recommend that game whenever it goes on sale. For even $5.99, $7.49 I think it is, it's just like, it's a little difficult to recommend it at that price point just because it's like, dude, this game should be 60 frames per second. Well, guess what? If it goes on sale now, hopefully at a deep discount, I'll definitely be mentioning it more. Alright, moving on from that, speaking of classic games, the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion got a remastered release earlier in 2025. I was about to say earlier in the year. It is in fact 2026. We cannot be saying that no more. But it got a remastered release in 2025. It was done as a shadow drop, and I don't think there was any issue with the shadow drop. I think there was an issue with the game not performing all too well and having a lot of technical issues. However, an element of the game that I find rather interesting is that the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered was Xbox's third best-selling game on PlayStation 5. That's coming from Millennia Analytics. That is after Call of Duty Black Ops 7 and Forza Horizon 5, which, you know, I love Forza Horizon 5. Seeing how well that game did is a little bit surprising to me. Maybe because it's a marquee IP and it coming from Xbox to PlayStation was a big deal, but I would have thought Gears of War, you know, that to me is a bigger IP, and I thought Gears of War Remastered was gonna do better than it did. It still did fairly good, but maybe that's an element of, you know, it being Gears of War 1 and it being priced at $39.99. I don't know, but Oblivion Remastered did very well, selling 1.1 million copies on PlayStation 5, and remember, that's at a $50 price point. That's not at Game Pass or anything like that. However, a very interesting element of all of this is despite selling over 1 million copies, Oblivion Remastered players on Sony's console played less than 15 hours of the game. Obviously, Oblivion, much lengthier than 15 hours, and it's gonna take you a bit of time. Especially if you're doing all of the optional content and things of that nature. Oblivion is a bit of an undertaking. You're not beating that game in 15 hours, at least unless you're doing some sort of quick run through the game, but I digress. I always find this information fascinating, and when it comes to games that are really tugging at those nostalgic heartstrings, that's something I think is very important to assess, because I think nostalgia can be a promotional vehicle for your game, but it ends at that. It's a promotional vehicle for your game. I think the one game that this was abundantly clear with was Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. That game had an immense amount of hype, but I think that game told everybody nostalgia absolutely has a shelf life, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I really like Sparking Zero. Sparking Zero was exactly the game that I thought it was going to be, and I had a great time with it, but I think some people get so amped up about, oh, this is the game I played growing up, and we do look at the past a little bit differently, and sometimes we think these games we played growing up, that yes, they are great, but going back and playing them, even if they're remastered, maybe it's a bit of, you know, it is what it is. I'd rather play the other games. And as far as completion rates in games go, this has been something I've been getting a kick out of going through the trophy section in games, and I just find it fascinating to look at where people are dropping games and the completion percentage just completely falls off a cliff. For example, like Elden Ring, you know, 35% of people or 40% of people aren't even beating Margaret in Elden Ring. People boot up Elden Ring and then they get checked right out the gate, and then they stop playing the game without beating Margaret. Alan Wake 2, a game that I did another playthrough of recently. It's so interesting with that game how so many people drop the game right around chapter 3, I believe it is, and that's one of the big saga missions, and I think the level design in that mission is terrible, but I do find it interesting where exactly people do drop games, and Oblivion's an interesting one because I think a lot of people bought Oblivion on the basis that it's Elder Scrolls. People have incredibly high opinions about Skyrim, but going back and playing Oblivion, even with this remastered release, it can be a bit of a dated experience, and then on top of that, you're talking about issues that are still persisting with the game from a technical standpoint. Yeah, I can see why people dropped it within 15 hours, but I just find that information rather interesting. 1.1 million copies is still incredibly successful, especially because the bulk of those sales are gonna be digitally, because the physical release came out way later. So there you go with that, but that's gonna do it for me. Again, great upgrade coming to Far Cry 3 Classic Edition. That game is going to 60 frames per second. Cannot wait for that. An all-time classic, now gonna be playable at 60 FPS, and interesting information with Oblivion Remastered. Good stuff there. That's gonna do it for me. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, sound off there. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.